Welcome back, everyone. We love to take these deep dives into really complex topics, and today we're tackling one that's always in the news, but rarely gets the nuanced attention it deserves.
Yeah, definitely.
Ballistic rockets in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah.
We're going beyond just, the headlines and really dissecting the specifics of these weapons, their impact, and honestly, the kind of crazy economics involved.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, we've got some research to guide us, right?
Absolutely. We're diving deep into a paper titled, just get ready for it, Specification Study of Interstate Ballistic Rockets in the Israeli-Palestinian War. A review of rockets used by Hamas, Hezbollah, and Taliban forces against Israel.
Wow, that is a mouthful.
It's a dense one for sure, published in the International Journal of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences, but it's packed with insights.
All right, so dense, packed with insights. But before we get lost in the technical weeds, can we set the stage a bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Who are the main groups actually using these rockets, and why are they relying on this kind of weaponry in the first place?
All right, so you've got three key players here: Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Taliban. Now, it's important to note that the Taliban isn't directly involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict,
Right.
but their use of rockets provides a really helpful comparison point.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Hamas operates out of Gaza, while Hezbollah is based in Lebanon. And what's really fascinating is that none of these groups actually have, like, traditional armies, right?
Wait, yeah.
Or air forces in the conventional sense.
So they're kind of at a disadvantage when it comes to that sort of traditional military power. Right.
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of asymmetric warfare comes into play. It's basically a way for a weaker force to kind of try to level the playing field against a much stronger opponent. Think David and Goliath, right?
Okay, yeah, I like that analogy.
David didn't try to outmuscle Goliath. He used a different strategy, a slingshot, to take him down.
So in this case, the ballistic rockets are like that slingshot.
Precisely. They're a way for these groups to punch above their weight, so to speak.
Makes sense. So let's get into the specifics here.
Okay.
What kind of rockets are we actually talking about?
All right, so the research paper gets into the nitty-gritty, the different types of rockets that each group uses. And this is where it gets super interesting, because we see a clear difference in the choices each group is making, reflecting their different strategies and goals.
Okay, so let's do a rocket rundown. I'm actually really curious to see what they're working with.
Let's start with Hamas. They're known for using a mix of locally made and imported rockets.
Okay.
Their most basic model is the Qassam rocket. It's got a relatively short range.
How short are we talking?
We're talking about 10 to 20 kilometers.
Okay.
And a small warhead carries roughly 5–10 kilos of explosives.
Right, not huge.
But here's the key. The Qassam is cheap and easy to produce, even with very limited resources.
So they're prioritizing quantity over quality in a sense.
To a certain extent, yeah. The Qassam is all about efficiency, right? Making the most of what they've got. Now, they also use Grad rockets, which they import. These have a longer range, hitting targets about 20 to 40 kilometers away, and they pack a bit more punch, with warheads carrying up to 20 kilos of explosives.
Okay, so a step up from the Qassam, but I'm guessing they have something even bigger in their arsenal.
They do. The Fajar 5 is their most advanced rocket, and this one's a real game changer. Range of up to 75 kilometers.
Oh, okay.
And a 90-kilogram warhead. You can see there's a clear progression in their rocket technology, allowing them to hit targets much farther away and obviously inflict more damage.
75 kilometers, that's a pretty significant jump.
Yeah.
All right, so that's Hamas. What about Hezbollah? What are they working with?
Hezbollah also uses a mix of locally made and imported rockets. Their kind of go-to is the Katyusha, which is comparable to the Qassam in terms of range, but packs a slightly heavier warhead, around 22 kilograms.
Okay.
But what really sets Hezbollah apart is their access to the Zelzal rocket.
Okay, this one I'm sensing is a big deal.
You could say that massive range, we're talking 200 kilometers, and its warhead can carry a staggering 600 kilos of explosives. That's enough to cause serious damage deep within Israeli territory.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So you see, unlike Hamas, which really emphasizes that efficiency with the Qassam, Hezbollah's strategy seems to be more about maximizing impact. They want to be able to strike deep and inflict that significant damage.
Okay, so a real contrast in approach there. And what about the Taliban? You mentioned that they provide a kind of an interesting point of comparison, even though they're not directly involved in this conflict.
Right, so they rely mainly on the BM-1 and the Grad. The BM-1 is pretty basic, short-range, small warhead. But as we saw with Hamas, the Grad is a more capable weapon with a longer range and a heavier warhead.
So it sounds like the Taliban's rocket capabilities kind of fall somewhere in between Hamas and Hezbollah.
That's a fair assessment. But what's really striking is that all three groups, despite their different approaches, are constantly trying to improve their rocket technology. They're investing in longer ranges, heavier warheads, greater accuracy. It's a constant evolution.
Yeah. It definitely sounds like a bit of an arms race is happening here. But if these groups are kind of at a disadvantage conventionally, how are they managing to fund these increasingly sophisticated weapons programs?
That's where the economics of this whole conflict get really, really interesting. And that's what we're going to unpack next.
So we've got a sense of who the players are, the kinds of rockets they're using, but I gotta ask,
Yeah.
how effective are these weapons? Are they actually achieving their goals, or are they more of a symbolic threat? What are we talking about here?
That's a great question. And it's something that the research paper really dives into. It's not just about the number of rockets, right?
Right.
It's about the impact they have.
So not necessarily about wiping out cities or anything.
No, not at all.
Okay.
In fact, the paper talks about these two key concepts, efficiency and effectiveness.
Okay.
When it comes to efficiency, these groups are all about maximizing those limited resources, right?
Mhm.
Think low-cost production, simple launch methods, and relying on tactics like hidden launch sites, stuff like that.
So, like we talked about earlier, the Qassam rocket,
Exactly.
it's not fancy, but it's cheap, easy to produce.
Exactly. It's a perfect example, right?
Right.
For Hamas, it's a very efficient weapon.
Yeah.
They can launch a lot of them without, breaking the bank, so to speak. But effectiveness is a different story, right?
Right.
Effectiveness is about the actual impact those rockets have, and that includes psychological impact.
Yeah, I was going to say, I imagine just the constant threat of these attacks
Right.
must create a lot of fear, disruption.
Absolutely. Imagine, just living under this constant threat of rockets raining down,
Right.
even if most of them are intercepted, right?
Right.
That psychological toll can be immense. Daily life is disrupted, economies are damaged, and you just have this constant sense of insecurity.
So even if the physical damage isn't always, massive, the impact on people's lives, it's real.
It's very real. And that actually brings us to another fascinating aspect of this whole situation. Israel's response. They've developed this very sophisticated defense system called Iron Dome.
Yeah, I've heard about Iron Dome. It seems like pretty amazing technology.
It is. It uses radar to detect those incoming rockets and then fires interceptor missiles to just blow them out of the sky. And it's been incredibly effective at protecting Israeli civilians from harm.
But I'm guessing there's a catch, right? There's always a catch.
Well, the catch is the cost factor. Intercepting just one rocket with Iron Dome can cost tens of thousands of dollars,
Whoa.
sometimes even more.
Really?
Yeah, and that's way more than the cost of actually producing the rocket itself.
So you're saying it's way more expensive to defend against these rockets than it is to launch them?
It is, and that creates a real dilemma for Israel, right?
Yeah.
They're stuck in this situation where it's incredibly costly to defend themselves, and as the technology on the other side gets better, those costs just keep going up. It could become unsustainable.
It really sounds like a no-win situation. Is there any way out of this cycle?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And the research paper actually touches on this. It talks about the need for a holistic approach to peace,
Okay.
one that goes beyond just, military solutions.
So what does that even look like? What's the alternative to this constant back and forth?
It's about addressing the root causes,
Right.
Not just the symptoms.
Okay.
Think economic development, reducing poverty, promoting education, fostering genuine dialogue, that kind of thing.
Yeah, those are big, complex issues. It sounds like a really daunting task.
It's no small feat, right?
Right.
But the research suggests that investing in those areas, however difficult, could be more effective and definitely more sustainable in the long run than just pouring money into more and more weapons.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you can actually address those underlying issues, you might be able to actually break that cycle.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
But there's another piece to this whole puzzle, and it's a crucial one.
Mm.
Funding.
Oh, yeah, the money.
Right.
Where are these groups getting the money to develop and produce all these weapons?
It's a really complex mix of funding sources. Some of it comes from state sponsors,
Okay.
like Iran's support for Hezbollah, for example.
So you're saying, like, governments are directly funding these groups?
In some cases, yes.
Wow.
But there are other sources as well, right? Like donations from individuals, organizations that support their cause.
Okay.
And then there's the kind of illicit side of things.
Okay.
Activities like smuggling and,
But what else could there be?
believe it or not, the use of cryptocurrencies.
Hey, crypto. Really?
Yeah, it's a relatively new development.
That's interesting.
But these groups are increasingly turning to cryptocurrencies because they're so hard to trace, hard to regulate. It's a way for them to move money around without attracting as much attention.
So they're adapting to the modern financial landscape.
Exactly.
It's fascinating. But I wonder, what about the economic impact on the people who are actually living in these areas controlled by these groups? Are they benefiting from this investment in weapons?
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
And the research highlights that, often this spending on rockets, it comes at the expense of social programs in these areas.
Oh, wow.
So you have a situation where they're investing heavily in weaponry, but people are struggling with poverty, unemployment, lack of basic services.
So it's like a trade-off.
Yeah.
They're prioritizing military might over the well-being of their own people.
It's a complex dilemma, for sure. Creates a lot of tension.
Yeah, I bet.
But there's another economic angle to this whole conflict that we haven't really touched on yet. The Israeli defense industry.
Oh, okay. This is interesting. I'm intrigued.
Right.
Yeah.
So the constant threat of these rocket attacks, it's actually fueled this booming defense industry in Israel.
Okay.
Companies like Rafael, which developed that Iron Dome system,
Right.
they're at the forefront of this.
So the conflict itself has kind of created this demand for this advanced weaponry,
Yeah.
which in turn boosts the Israeli economy.
It's this kind of paradoxical situation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
On one hand, the conflict is a drain on resources.
Yeah.
Creates instability.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's also created this lucrative market for defense technology.
It's fascinating, but it also raises a lot of ethical questions, right?
Absolutely. It makes you think about the whole global arms trade.
Yeah.
And the role that other countries are playing in fueling this conflict, And that's something we're going to dig into even more in the final part of our deep dive.
We've really gone deep here, haven't we? I mean, from the actual rockets themselves to the economic and psychological impact of this conflict.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But I keep coming back to this idea of a holistic approach to peace.
Right.
What does that even look like in reality in a situation that's this complex,
Yeah, it's definitely not a simple answer.
Right.
And it's something the research paper really grapples with as well,
Yeah.
You can't just throw more weapons at the problem or
Right.
try to outspend each other. Like,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
got to be something deeper.
So we're talking about those underlying issues, poverty,
Yeah.
inequality. You said political disenfranchisement, things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about investing in those things,
Hmm.
in economic development, education, healthcare, infrastructure,
Yeah.
creating opportunities for people to just build better lives
Right.
for themselves, for their families.
But how do you even begin to do that when there's so much
Right.
mistrust, animosity between the different sides?
It's tough, but it requires a commitment to dialogue,
Right.
to really try to understand each other's perspectives and find some common ground. It's
Wow.
and it's a difficult process for sure.
Yeah.
But the alternative, it's
Right.
just more of the same, right?
Yeah, more violence.
Yeah.
What about the international community? Can outside powers, can they play a role in kind of facilitating this?
They absolutely can.
Yeah.
They can provide that financial assistance, help mediate disputes, hold everyone accountable for their actions, that sort of thing.
So it's not just about, giving weapons, giving military aid. It's about supporting this broader peace-building process.
Exactly. And that actually brings us back to the global arms trade that we were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
That flow of weapons into the region,
Yeah.
it really just makes everything worse.
So even if countries are giving military aid with, the best intentions,
Right.
they want to help their allies,
Right.
it could be making the situation worse over time.
It's one of those really complex issues with no easy answers.
Yeah.
But it's so important to think about those unintended consequences,
Right.
and really explore those other approaches, the diplomacy, the development, the peace building.
Okay, so this has been, really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about. I feel a bit overwhelmed by how complex it is, to be honest.
Yeah, it is.
What's the key takeaway? For everyone listening, what should they be thinking about as they kind of process all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there are no quick fixes here, right? It's multifaceted, deep historical roots, and there's a lot of different interests at play.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we should give up on peace.
Right. Yeah.
It's just,
There's got to be hope.
there is.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that complexity, engaging with it,
Yeah.
having those conversations,
Yeah.
supporting those efforts to actually build a better future for everyone.
A more just and equitable future.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time
Of course.
to walk us through all of this. It's given me a lot to think about.
It's always great to chat.
And for everyone listening out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep engaging in these really important conversations. Until next time.